The air inside the hall was electric, the kind of stillness that hums right before a storm. Cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. Every seat was filled, every gaze locked on the stage where two figures sat opposite each other. Governor Greg Abbott, confident and smirking, and Representative Jasmine Crockett, poised, focused, unshaken. She was mid-sentence, explaining the human cost behind border policy. The families separated, the communities destabilized, when Abbott's voice sliced through hers, sudden and sharp. "Excuse me, Congresswoman," he interrupted, leaning forward. "If Washington understood even half of what Texas deals with every day, maybe you'd think twice before lecturing us." A murmur rippled across the audience. The tone wasn't polite. It was performative, condescending. The kind of interruption meant to draw blood. Crockett paused. She didn't look away. The lights above caught a faint glimmer in her eyes, not surprise, but recognition. Abbott smirked, sensing a win. "Go ahead," he added, leaning back in his chair. "You were saying something about accountability?" The moderator shifted uncomfortably. The tension thickened. Even the sound crew held their breath, waiting. Somewhere, a camera operator zoomed in, instinctively knowing this was the moment that would travel across every screen in America. Crockett straightened her posture. Her silence stretched long enough to make the audience squirm. Abbott's grin began to fade. That's when it happened. The moment before the eruption, the pause before the fire. Jasmine Crockett didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to interrupt back. All she did was hold her ground, her gaze steady and unblinking. And in that stillness, something shifted. The balance of the room, the energy in the crowd, the story itself. What began as an ambush now teetered on the edge of collapse. The governor's smugness meeting a wall stronger than he expected. Composure. The camera flashed, capturing that look. Calm defiance framed in the glare of stage lights. But what Jasmine said next didn't just silence the governor. It shook the entire political arena. The event had been advertised as a bipartisan forum on border security and state responsibility, a chance for dialogue, not division. But from the moment the cameras switched on, it became clear that Governor Greg Abbott had a different script in mind. He wasn't there to exchange ideas. He was there to perform. Behind him hung a massive state flag, centered like a backdrop for dominance. Every question tossed his way turned into a sermon on federal overreach, weak leadership, and the chaos at the border. The crowd, a mix of local officials, journalists, and policy aides, responded in uneven waves, polite applause from some, uneasy silence from others. Then came Jasmine Crockett. Invited as a guest voice of reason, she represented the counterpoint, a federal lawmaker grounded in legal experience, compassion, and pragmatism. Her purpose was to bring clarity, to discuss human impact alongside state logistics. But the moment she began connecting statistics to stories, faces to figures, Abbott saw an opening. He pivoted his body toward her, his tone sharpening. "Congresswoman," he said, "what you call compassion, the rest of us call dysfunction. You defend policies that make Texas pay for Washington's failures." The words weren't about policy anymore. They were about power. The room felt it. The audience shifted in their seats. It was no longer a discussion between equals. It was a test of composure under fire. Abbott leaned back, savoring his own phrasing. "You say you want accountability," he continued, "but the truth is your party's too detached from reality to understand what Texans live through every day." His supporters nodded, emboldened. The cameras turned toward Crockett, the lone woman of color on stage, seated between two men who had spoken twice her time combined. Crockett inhaled slowly. Her hands remained still on the desk, fingers lightly touching. She had seen this before. Not this exact performance, but this same choreography of power. The interrupting, the framing, the assumption that authority belonged to the louder voice. In her expression, a quiet resolve began to rise. Not anger, but something deeper. Something measured. She glanced toward the moderator, who hesitated, eyes flicking between them. No rescue was coming. No one was going to redirect the conversation. The injustice in the air was subtle yet heavy, not just political, but symbolic. A governor dismissing a congresswoman, a man speaking over a woman, a system echoing through a single exchange. And yet, in that imbalance, there was power. Because Crockett knew every eye, every lens, every watching heart was witnessing not just an argument, but a moment of truth. For Abbott, this was a spectacle, a stage to reinforce his dominance. For her, it was something far more consequential, a chance to redefine what strength looks like in a space built to silence it. He smirked again, mistaking her composure for retreat. "See?" he said lightly, chuckling under his breath. No answer. Just talking points. The line landed like a dare, but Crockett didn't move, didn't blink. She stayed silent for a moment, and in that silence, the entire hall leaned forward. Long before the confrontation with Jasmine Crockett, Greg Abbott had perfected the art of political control. To his supporters, he was the unshakable governor, composed, articulate, the picture of authority. But to those who had watched him closely, that composure was less strength and more calculation. Every smirk, every pause, every moment of outrage was theater. He had built his career on the illusion of certainty. In public, he presented himself as the protector of liberty, the man who stood up to Washington, who vowed to defend Texans from overreach. Yet, behind closed doors and beneath the slogans, there was a consistent truth. Abbott's version of freedom often meant silencing those who dared to question him. Reporters knew the pattern. He would hold press briefings, invite questions, then cut off any journalist who pressed too far. The ones who persisted found their press access suddenly under review. He claimed to champion open dialogue, but his record told a different story, one of narrowing debate until only his own voice remained. The irony was sharp. The man who claimed to defend the people's rights had a history of restricting their protests. Teachers asking for better pay were dismissed as agitators. Women demanding reproductive autonomy were labeled radical. Activists at the Capitol were met with barricades and arrests, and Abbott, behind his podium, called it restoring order. Every confrontation seemed to strengthen his political armor, but it also exposed the cracks. Each time he used his authority to suppress dissent, his speeches about liberty rang hollower. Yet he never wavered, not because he didn't know, but because he didn't care. Power to Abbott wasn't a responsibility. It was theater. He cultivated moments of performative outrage. When cameras rolled, he'd lean forward, voice tightening just enough to sound righteous. He'd pound the table not out of passion, but for optics. Every expression was framed to go viral. The clipped sound bites, the feigned indignation, the rehearsed pauses that made him look unflinching. Those who worked closest to him whispered about his obsession with image control. Staffers described days spent rehearsing public remarks, ensuring no slip, no unscripted emotion escaped his delivery. When controversy hit, whether it was a scandal involving public funds or criticism over a humanitarian crisis, his instinct wasn't empathy. It was spin. Even his allies began to sense it, the growing gap between who he claimed to be and what his leadership had become. Yet in public, Abbott remained untouchable. The governor's chair became his stage, and every opponent was just another prop to showcase his dominance. He had built a fortress of confidence around himself, one where humility couldn't enter, and accountability never found a seat. But what truly defined Abbott wasn't his ideology. It was his refusal to be challenged. In town halls, when local leaders questioned state cuts to education or health care, he'd smile dismissively, then pivot to federal failures. When victims of natural disasters asked for better coordination, he'd promise investigations that never arrived. The pattern repeated. Deflect, dominate, dismiss. It wasn't rage that fueled him. It was control. The need to maintain the illusion that he was always the smartest man in the room, the one steering the conversation. But that control came at a cost. Each televised performance chipped away at authenticity. The public saw the firmness, but those who watched closely saw the flicker. the calculated eyes searching for approval, the quick glances to staffers for reassurance. Beneath the calm exterior was a man terrified of being outshone, of losing the spotlight he'd fought so hard to keep. And that's why Jasmine Crockett's presence threatened him in ways others never did. She wasn't afraid of him. She didn't defer, didn't fumble her words, didn't buy into his authority. In that panel, Abbott saw something rare, a woman who carried her truth without seeking permission to speak it. A congresswoman who didn't need to match his volume to dismantle his argument. He recognized it instantly, even before she spoke her next words. Because for a man who'd spent his career silencing others, there was nothing more dangerous than someone who wouldn't stay quiet. His smile that night, the smug, rehearsed confidence, was a shield. One that had protected him for decades from scrutiny, empathy, or vulnerability. But this time it wouldn't be enough. He had crafted his power from dominance, his authority from intimidation, his identity from control. But Abbott's routine dominance was about to face something it had never encountered before. Jasmine Crockett's truth. Long before the bright lights and television cameras, Jasmine Crockett's story began in quieter rooms, ones where her voice had to fight just to be heard. She didn't grow up surrounded by influence or privilege. Her foundation was work, persistence, and a deep conviction that justice wasn't something given. It was something fought for, often at great cost. In college, while others coasted through semesters, she was already preparing case briefs and sitting in on public hearings, trying to understand not just the law, but the people it left behind. Nights bled into mornings over textbooks stacked like barricades, coffee going cold as she underlined passages about civil rights, due process, and the long shadow of inequity. She knew even then that knowledge would be her weapon. When she earned her law degree, it wasn't celebration she felt. It was responsibility. She opened a small practice, taking on clients who couldn't afford the polished attorneys that filled Texas courtrooms. Many of them came in defeated, unsure anyone would listen. But Crockett did. She didn't see statistics or case numbers. She saw stories, people, patterns of neglect and abuse that others had learned to overlook. She faced hostility early and often. Courtrooms where her competence was doubted before she even spoke. Opponents who mistook her calm for weakness. Judges who cut her off mid-argument only to let her male counterparts speak uninterrupted. Yet, she never let it harden her. It sharpened her. There was a moment, one she rarely talks about, when a client she defended in a wrongful arrest case hugged her after the verdict, whispering through tears, "You didn't just fight for me. You made me feel seen." That was the moment Crockett decided public service wasn't optional anymore. Politics, she knew, wasn't pure, but it was powerful. And for someone who had spent years fighting battles one courtroom at a time, Congress represented a chance to fight for thousands. When she ran for office, few believed she could win. She was too outspoken, they said, too uncompromising, too unwilling to play the game, but that became her greatest strength. She refused to soften her message for comfort or applause. The campaign trail was brutal. Whispers, attacks, even mockery about her background. But Crockett didn't campaign with slogans. She campaigned with stories. Stories of mothers who lost children to injustice, families priced out of homes, veterans denied care. Every conversation, every debate became another reminder of why she was running, not to join the system, but to challenge it. And when she finally won, it wasn't just a victory for her. It was a signal to every young woman watching, to every immigrant child told to stay quiet, to every person who had ever been dismissed for speaking truth. That dignity could win. In Congress, her reputation grew quickly. She wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but she was the most precise. When others threw slogans, she threw facts. When opponents tried to rattle her, she responded with poise that made even her critics pause. Still, her rise wasn't without consequence. The same systems she spoke against tried to box her in. Pundits called her too aggressive. Commentators accused her of being angry. They tried to turn her passion into a flaw. But Crockett knew the subtext. She was being told she didn't fit the mold. and rather than bending to it, she broke it. Behind the speeches and headlines, there was always the same Jasmine, deliberate, thoughtful, and relentlessly principled. Late nights reading policy drafts, quiet dinners alone, reflecting on the weight of each vote, the exhaustion of being both advocate and target, but through it all, she never lost her composure. Her calm wasn't born of indifference. It was discipline, a kind of grace that only comes from surviving storms. What made her stand out wasn't defiance for its own sake. It was purpose. She didn't raise her voice to trend on social media, though she often did. She spoke because silence had never saved anyone. Even as she became a recognizable face in politics, Crockett avoided the trappings of celebrity. She didn't chase cameras. They found her. She didn't script her moments. They happened because truth has a way of finding its own spotlight. Colleagues described her as a fighter who never forgets who she's fighting for. Opponents called her tough, unyielding, and impossible to intimidate. They meant it as criticism. She took it as proof she was doing something right. Every success carried the echo of the rooms she once sat in, the classrooms where she was underestimated, the courtrooms where she was dismissed, the campaign stops where she was told she'd never belong. Each insult became fuel. Each dismissal became a lesson. So when she walked onto that stage beside Governor Abbott, it wasn't just another public appearance. It was the culmination of everything she had endured, every barrier broken, every doubt overcome. To Abbott, it was a policy forum. To Crockett, it was another battlefield, another test of integrity in a world addicted to performance. She knew how he operated. Men like Abbott didn't expect pushback from people like her. They expected silence, compliance, deference. But she wasn't built for any of that. She carried years of struggle in her poise, years of being told to wait her turn, and deciding every time that her turn was now. The same calm that once carried her through courtrooms would carry her here. The same truth that guided her into politics would soon expose the very arrogance sitting beside her. And when the cameras rolled, all that history, every struggle, every fight, came roaring back in a single moment. The air in the auditorium felt heavier now. The debate, meant to be a discussion on state power and border policy, had transformed into something else entirely, a live clash of egos, ideals, and identity. Cameras zoomed in. The moderator's smile had tightened to a nervous line. Every word between Governor Greg Abbott and Representative Jasmine Crockett carried a voltage that could light the room or burn it down. Abbott leaned forward, his voice filling the hall like a thunderclap. "Representative Crockett," he said, dragging out her title as if it were a formality he barely tolerated. "You sit in Washington, surrounded by bureaucrats who've never set foot near the border. You defend policies that make Texans less safe. You defend dysfunction," the audience murmured, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. Crockett didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still, pen balanced in her hand, eyes steady. A portrait of composure. Abbott caught the silence and mistook it for weakness. He pressed on. "You people, and I mean that respectfully," he said with that smug half-smile that cameras love and truth despises. "Talk about compassion, but what about the ranchers whose lands are overrun? What about the mothers who fear for their safety? You defend chaos while Texans demand control." A few in the crowd clapped. Others exchanged glances. The moderator tried to interject, but Abbott wasn't done. His voice rose, commanding the room. "Maybe if Congress spent less time on sound bites and more time on securing our state, we wouldn't have to do Washington's job for them." Crockett slowly uncrossed her legs, her pen tapping once on the table. Her face didn't change. Calm, precise, almost surgical in its restraint, Abbott noticed. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with confidence. "I get it," he said, feigning empathy. "You're here to play politics. But down here in Texas, we lead. We don't wait for permission from people who don't understand our problems." The words landed heavy, intentional, not just an attack on policy, but on personhood. He wasn't debating an issue. He was asserting dominance. The moderator cleared his throat. "Governor, let's allow Representative." But Abbott cut in again. "No, let's be honest. You defend policies that hurt this state. You defend open borders. You defend lawlessness. Tell me, Congresswoman, when's the last time you stood with Texans instead of D.C. elites?" That line drew gasps, a mix of shock and anticipation. The crowd leaned forward. The energy shifted from interest to electricity. Crockett didn't respond immediately. Her silence was deliberate, a pause so long it started to make even Abbott uneasy. The moderator glanced her way, as if unsure whether to move on or brace for impact. Abbott smirked, mistaking the pause again. "That's what I thought," he said, voice dripping with condescension. When faced with facts, the rhetoric fades. A few people chuckled nervously. Others watched her, not him, sensing that something was about to break. Crockett slowly placed her pen on the table and leaned slightly forward. Her expression was calm, unreadable. No theatrics, no raised voice. Just presence. The camera zoomed in, Abbott's jaw tight, Crockett's eyes steady. Between them, the air crackled with unspoken defiance. The moderator, sensing the gravity of the moment, stayed quiet. The audience followed suit. Even the hum of distant equipment seemed to stop, and then a subtle shift, one almost imperceptible. Crockett's lips parted slightly, not in anger but in realization. You could feel it. That quiet before the storm, that razor-thin line between humiliation and reckoning. Abbott tried to fill the silence again. "You see, Representative, leadership requires backbone, not talking points." That was his mistake. The crowd tensed. They could feel her patience ending, her restraint running out of road. Crockett's eyes didn't leave his. The lights glared hotter now, reflecting off the table between them. Every camera was locked on her face. The moderator froze. Abbott's smirk flickered, just a hint of doubt. And then she spoke. 7 words that flipped the entire conversation on its head. For a long, charged second, silence ruled the room. Then Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her voice low but clear, slicing through the static of ego and noise. "Governor Abbott," she began, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "I appreciate your passion for Texans. Truly I do. But passion without truth is just performance." The words dropped softly, but their precision drew a visible flinch from Abbott. He straightened in his chair. The moderator froze. The crowd leaned closer. Crockett's tone was steady, measured. Not defensive, not loud, but devastatingly exact. "You talk about law and order. Yet under your leadership, our grid collapsed while families froze in their homes. You talk about protecting Texans, but when those same families asked for help, you blamed wind turbines and flew out of state to raise money." Murmurs rippled through the audience. The tension broke into quiet awe. Cameras zoomed closer. Abbott's face twitched, his confident smirk faltering for the first time. Crockett continued, eyes locked on him. "You call Washington detached from reality. But the reality is, you've spent years turning suffering into spectacle. Every press conference, every photo op at the border, all performance, no policy. Texans deserve protection, not propaganda." Abbott inhaled sharply, shifting in his seat. "With all due respect," he began, but Crockett cut him off gently, her voice smooth as glass. "With all due respect, Governor, you don't get to redefine respect every time a woman corrects you." The crowd exploded. Gasps, laughter, applause. A wave of vindication rolled through the hall. Even the moderator couldn't hide the flicker of a grin. Abbott tried to regain control, holding up his hand as if to reclaim authority, but it was gone, slipping fast. Crockett pressed forward, each word deliberate, each sentence a scalpel. "You preach freedom, yet you've signed laws that silence teachers, punish women, and limit what voters can do at the ballot box. You talk about protecting Texas, but what you protect is control. The kind that tells people when to speak, how to think, and who matters." Her voice grew stronger, a current building force with every phrase. "See, freedom isn't about who can shout the loudest at a microphone. It's about who gets to live without fear. And right now, too many Texans are afraid, not of Washington, but of the people running their own state." Phones glowed across the crowd, thumbs flying. She's ending him live. Abbott just got dismantled. Crockett won. Governor Zero Abbott's jaw tightened. Congresswoman, you're twisting facts. Crockett tilted her head, unbothered. Facts? You mean the data from your own agencies? The ones that show crime rates down in the very cities you claim are overrun? Or the border reports that prove your policies have cost taxpayers billions with no measurable impact? Her gaze sharpened, voice unwavering. You say you care about border communities, but when local mayors asked for infrastructure funding, you said no. When families begged for resources, you said it wasn't your problem. But when it's time to take credit, suddenly it's all you. The audience clapped again, louder now, no longer restrained. Even a few reporters at the back raised eyebrows, scribbling furiously. Abbott's composure began to crack. His hands gripped the table. That's not fair, he muttered, but the words drowned under the rising noise. Crockett leaned in slightly, voice softer now, not an attack, but a reckoning. Governor, fairness would have been keeping the lights on. Fairness would have been letting Texans make decisions about their own bodies. Fairness would have been telling the truth, not blaming others to keep your image clean. A murmur of amen echoed faintly from somewhere in the back. Then came the pivot, the emotional crescendo. Crockett placed a hand flat on the table, her tone turning from analytical to personal. I grew up watching people like you talk about freedom as if it's a prize only a few can hold. But I've walked into rooms where no one thought I belonged, and I stayed. Because freedom isn't yours to grant, Governor. It's ours to claim. That line hit like a drumbeat. Applause thundered. Some people stood. The moderator didn't even try to quiet them this time. Abbott looked around, searching for an ally, for something, anything to hold on to. But all he found were lenses capturing the unraveling of his dominance in real time. Crockett wasn't finished. You talk about protecting Texas, but let me tell you what protecting Texas really looks like. It's making sure children can learn without fear. It's paying teachers what they're worth. It's giving working families clean water, fair wages, and electricity that doesn't vanish when the temperature drops below zero. That's what strength looks like. Not stunts at the border or bills that punish the powerless. The crowd roared again, chants beginning to rise. Say it, Jasmine. Tell him. Abbott tried to raise his voice above the noise, but it was useless. His sound bites had become static, drowned beneath the echo of authenticity, and still Crockett's delivery stayed grounded, her tone resolute, her power calm. She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. She looked directly into the nearest camera, the one feeding live to millions, and spoke her final words. So, Governor, you can interrupt me, you can talk over me, but you cannot rewrite reality. Because at the end of the day, when the lights go out, Texans don't remember the man who shouted the loudest. They remember who stood up when it mattered. The audience erupted. Standing ovation. Applause like thunder rolling through steel and concrete. Abbott sat frozen, his practiced expression faltering, the smug certainty replaced by stunned silence. And in that silence, Crockett simply leaned back, composed, unshaken. The cameras caught it all. The grace, the poise, the unmistakable shift of power. The moment went viral before she even sat down. Within hours, the clip had escaped the confines of that Texas policy forum and detonated across the internet. The soundbite. You can interrupt me, but you cannot rewrite reality. Looped endlessly on timelines, stitched, remixed, and subtitled in half a dozen languages. By midnight, Crockett Clapback had crossed 3 million views. By dawn, Abbott Exposed was trending nationwide. TikTok feeds became battlegrounds and victory parades all at once. A teacher in El Paso filmed herself reacting with tears in her eyes. That's what standing your ground looks like. A young law student in Atlanta wrote, "This is why I'm in school, to be her one day." Even veteran journalists who'd seen 1,000 debates couldn't resist calling it the political mic drop of the year. Clips of Abbott's frozen face became instant memes. One showed him staring blankly, captioned, "When the talking points stop working." Another racked up millions of likes simply titled, "The moment ego met its match." Cable news ran the footage on a loop. On one side of the split screen, Abbott's interruptions, clipped and sharp. On the other, Crockett's composure, unwavering. Commentators dissected the rhythm of her takedown like analysts breaking down a championship play. It wasn't anger, one said on MSNBC. It was precision. She turned calm into a weapon. On late-night shows, hosts couldn't resist joining in. The audience erupted in laughter as one joked, Abbott tried to mansplain border policy and got deported from his own argument. Another added, she didn't raise her voice once, but she raised the bar for every debate after this. But beyond the humor, there was something deeper unfolding. A collective exhale from millions who had watched women, especially women of color, talked over, dismissed, minimized. For once, the interruption had been reversed. The story had been rewritten in real time. Across social media, threads flourished not just with applause but with gratitude. One viral tweet read, Crockett didn't just win an argument, she reminded us that dignity is power. Another said, every woman who's ever been interrupted in a meeting felt that moment. Critics scrambled to contain the fallout. Abbott's team released a carefully worded statement about spirited policy debate, but it only fueled the fire. Commentators pointed out the irony, a governor who built his brand on dominance now reduced to damage control. Conservative pundits tried to spin it, calling Crockett emotional and performative, but the clips betrayed them. Her calm had been the opposite of emotion. It had been authority. In liberal circles, Crockett's moment became emblematic of something larger. Editorials called it the turning point in tone. The instant politics felt human again. College campuses replayed it in classrooms, professors using it to discuss rhetoric, restraint, and representation. Community centers organized watch parties titled, Standing Our Ground. Even international outlets picked it up. A BBC headline read, Texas Showdown, Congresswoman's calm response resonates across America. On social media, the discourse expanded, from gender to race, from politics to respect. Women, in boardrooms and classrooms alike, shared their own stories of being talked over, interrupted, dismissed. Each post carried the same undertone. Finally, someone had pushed back with grace and won, and amid the noise, something more profound began to form, a sense of unity. For many, this wasn't just about politics. It was about presence. The act of being seen, heard, and unshaken in a space that tried to silence you. Crockett had done what so many dream of doing, holding her ground without losing her voice. Clips of her walking off stage circulated next, not triumphant, but serene. No gloating, no theatrics, just quiet confidence, the kind that makes noise all on its own. That image, her steady stride, chin lifted slightly, eyes calm, became the emblem of the movement her words had sparked. A political strategist commented on CNN, what we witnessed wasn't just a debate, it was a redefinition of strength, not the power to dominate, but the power to endure. By the next morning, Crockett's follower count had doubled. Her inbox flooded with messages of support, from activists, educators, everyday Americans who felt seen through her composure. Hashtags turned into fundraising drives for civic programs, voter education, women's leadership initiatives. The digital applause transformed into tangible action, and through it all, Abbott stayed mostly silent. For a man so accustomed to control, the quiet must have been deafening. The nation had found its symbol, not of defiance, but of dignity. But what Jasmine said afterward, off camera, revealed an even deeper truth about why this moment mattered. In the days that followed, the clip continued to dominate every feed, yet Jasmine Crockett herself stayed silent. No victory lap, no fiery follow-up, no tweet to twist the knife. Just stillness. That, in itself, became the loudest statement of all. When she finally spoke, it wasn't on a cable news set or through a viral post. It was during a quiet late-evening interview, a modest backdrop, her voice calm, the lights low. The interviewer leaned forward and asked the question everyone wanted answered. How did it feel to publicly shut down one of the most powerful governors in America? Crockett smiled softly, almost amused by the phrasing. "It's not about shutting someone down," she said. "It's about standing on what's right, even when someone tries to talk over it." Her tone wasn't triumphant. It was reflective, deliberate. "I wasn't there to win a debate," she continued. "I was there to speak truth. And sometimes, truth doesn't need volume. It just needs clarity." That line spread almost as fast as the original moment. Truth doesn't need volume. It resonated with students, activists, parents, and professionals who had all, in their own ways, felt minimized by louder voices. Crockett went on. "When someone interrupts you, when they try to make you small, the goal isn't to shout louder. It's to remind them and yourself that your worth isn't measured by their approval. It's measured by your integrity." For a generation raised on noise, on talking points, trending sound bites, and digital shouting matches, her restraint was revolutionary. She reframed what power looked like. Power wasn't the slam of a podium. It was a steady voice refusing to be broken. The interviewer asked if she had felt angry. Crockett nodded slightly. "Of course I did. But anger's just energy. You can spend it or you can shape it. I chose to shape it." That single sentence became the heart of her message. Commentators replayed it across the airwaves. Educators quoted it in classrooms, and social media stitched it over slow-motion clips of her composure during the debate. She continued, "I've learned something from every room I've walked into, especially the ones where people didn't expect me to belong. And what I've learned is this: you don't have to match arrogance with arrogance. You match it with purpose." Her words cut through the cynicism that had clouded American politics. They carried a reminder that leadership doesn't require spectacle. It requires steadiness. That silence, when rooted in confidence, can speak louder than any interruption. In the following weeks, Crockett's moment became less about Abbott and more about America itself, about what kind of nation people wanted to be part of. News anchors called it a master class in composure. Youth organizations framed it as the new face of courage. And as the noise faded, what lingered was not Abbott's embarrassment, but Crockett's grace. Her refusal to humiliate him became the proof of her strength. In one closing interview, she said quietly, "I didn't want to embarrass anyone. I wanted to remind everyone that you can't govern through fear. You lead through empathy. You lift through truth." Those words hung in the air, soft yet indelible. For millions watching, this wasn't just a story about politics. It was about humanity, about choosing restraint in an age of outrage, about standing tall without stepping on anyone else. Crockett had turned a confrontation into a conversation, one that reached far beyond party lines. And just when people thought the story was over, her final words reignited the conversation. The image that began it all, the silence, the frozen crowd, the governor's smug interruption, now meant something entirely different. What had started as an attempt to humiliate had transformed into a moment of undeniable power. The same hush that once carried tension now carried triumph. Governor Greg Abbott attacked Jasmine Crockett, but her clapback didn't just destroy his argument, it redefined the meaning of strength. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She let composure do what outrage never could. In that still frame, Abbott shrinking behind his podium, Crockett calm beneath the lights, the story of the night was written without words. The one who tried to dominate the room lost it. The one who stood in truth owned it. And that's the message worth remembering. Truth doesn't shout, it resonates. Real leadership isn't loud. It's rooted, dignified, unafraid. So if you felt that spark watching Jasmine Crockett stand her ground, don't let it fade. Share her moment. Amplify her courage. Remind the world that integrity still matters. That voices like hers deserve not just applause, but protection, support, and amplification. because every time someone like her speaks truth to power, it sends a message far beyond that stage, that dignity will always outlast arrogance. As the lights dimmed that night, Crockett rose from her seat and walked off stage, steady, graceful, unbothered. Abbott avoided her gaze, his confidence scattered in the silence he once tried to control. And for everyone watching, that image became more than a political moment. It became a reminder that in the end, character doesn't need to win the argument. It just needs to stand tall and let the truth echo.